In Millbrook Heights, 78-year-old Eloisa Wright returned from grocery shopping to discover her 3 children dividing her estate and planning her funeral. For 20 years, she'd built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire, with sharp business instincts and strategic thinking. When she overheard them discussing her declining mental state, she didn't know they'd been systematically poisoning her for months. Eloisa's decision to secretly record their conversations would expose attempted murder disguised as care. What began as suspicious financial irregularities became a deadly fight for survival. The Wright family would never be same. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The reusable grocery bags felt heavier in Eloisa Wright's arthritic hands as she approached the front door of her Millbrook Heights estate. At 78, she'd grown accustomed to the small struggles, keys that seemed to hide from her fingers, steps that required more concentration than they used to. But today felt different. The confusion that had been plaguing her for months seemed lighter somehow, as if the autumn air had cleared the persistent fog from her mind. She paused at the oak door, fumbling with her keychain. Through the frosted glass panels, she could see movement in the living room, unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. Victoria never visited on weekdays, claiming her charity committee obligations kept her too busy. James rarely came by at all these days, wrapped up in whatever business venture was currently failing. And Sophia was predictably unpredictable. The key finally found its home in the lock, and Eloisa pushed the door open with her shoulder, bags rustling. The familiar scent of her house, lavender and old wood, with a hint of the vanilla candles she burned in the evenings, should have welcomed her. Instead, voices drifted from the living room, carrying a tone that made her pause in the foyer. Obviously, Mother's bedroom suite will need to be completely redone. Victoria's voice, crisp and authoritative, echoed off the hardwood floors. The wallpaper is absolutely ghastly, and that 4-poster bed takes up far too much space. I'm thinking something more contemporary, minimalist. Eloisa's hand tightened on the grocery bags. She set them down silently, her business instincts, honed over decades of real estate negotiations, telling her to gather information before revealing her presence. The art collection should be appraised immediately, came James's voice, higher-pitched than usual with nervous energy. Some of those pieces Mother bought in the 80s might actually be worth something now. The market for contemporary abstract has really taken off. A third voice, unfamiliar but professional, responded. I'll need complete documentation of all assets before we can proceed with the transfer. The preliminary incompetency filing gives us a window, but we need to move quickly. Eloisa's blood chilled. Incompetency filing? Her legs suddenly felt unsteady, but not from the weakness that had been plaguing her lately. This was different. This was shock, giving way to a clarity she hadn't felt in months. She crept closer to the living room archway, pressing her back against the wall. Through the gap, she could see them arranged in her space like vultures at a feast. Victoria perched on the edge of the cream sofa, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the afternoon light, while her husband David stood behind her with a leather briefcase open on the coffee table. James sat in the wingback chair, her chair, the one Richard had given her for their 25th anniversary, wringing his hands and avoiding eye contact with anyone. And there was Sophia, her youngest, sitting cross-legged on the Persian rug with a notebook balanced on her knees, scribbling with the focused intensity she'd shown since childhood. But this wasn't one of her artistic sketches. This looked like inventory. Now, regarding the funeral arrangements, the unfamiliar voice continued. Eloisa could see him now. Harold Finch, the family attorney, balding, wearing wire-rimmed glasses, holding what appeared to be legal documents. I've taken the liberty of contacting Evergreen Memorial Gardens. They have a lovely plot available in the Rose section, very peaceful. The service itself, simple and elegant. Victoria interrupted. Mother never liked ostentatious displays. Something tasteful that reflects her contributions to the community. James shifted uncomfortably. Are we really discussing this while she's still? I mean, shouldn't we wait until what, James? David's voice cut through his brother-in-law's stammering with the precision of a corporate lawyer. Until her condition deteriorates further? Until she can't even recognize us, we're being pragmatic. She'd want us to be prepared. Prepared. The word tasted bitter in Eloisa's mouth. They were preparing for her death while she stood 10 feet away, clutching the wall for support. Besides, Victoria continued, her tone taking on the patronizing quality she'd perfected as a child, Dr. Walsh said the confusion episodes are becoming more frequent. Just last week, Mother couldn't remember where she'd put her medication. And yesterday she called me Patricia. That was her sister who died 15 years ago. Had she done that? Eloisa tried to remember, but the past few months were a haze of fatigue and disorientation. She'd attributed it to grief, to age, to the loneliness that had settled over the house like dust since Richard's death 20 years ago. Harold shuffled through his papers. The medical documentation supports our position. Progressive cognitive decline, documented instances of confusion and memory loss, inability to manage financial affairs. He looked up at the assembled family. The preliminary filing was approved this morning. Mrs. Wright is now legally considered mentally incompetent to manage her estate. The words hit Eloisa like a physical blow. Legally incompetent. Her, the woman who had built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire from nothing more than grief and determination after Richard's death. What about her medications? Sophia's voice, quiet but clear, made everyone turn toward her. She looked up from her notebook, with those dark eyes that had always seen too much. Are we maintaining the current dosage schedule? Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out 2 amber prescription bottles, setting them on the coffee table with a small plastic pill organizer. Dr. Walsh increased the anxiety medication last month, and we've been managing the sleep aids to help with the confusion. James, you've been monitoring the interactions, correct? James nodded reluctantly. The combination can cause temporary disorientation, but it's for her own safety. To keep her calm. Safety. Eloisa stared at the bottles, recognition dawning with horrifying clarity. Her evening pills, the ones Victoria had been so helpful about organizing each week. The ones that made her so drowsy, so confused, so unlike herself. Excellent, Harold said, making notes. Continue the current regimen until we have full legal control. The last thing we need is an episode of clarity that complicates the proceedings. The casual way he said it. Episode of clarity. As if her lucid moments were problems to be solved rather than glimpses of who she really was. Eloisa backed away from the archway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She needed to think, needed to process what she'd just heard. But first, she needed to get away from them, away from their casual discussion of her elimination. She made it to the stairs without being detected, climbing them with the muscle memory of 5 decades in this house. Her bedroom, Victoria's future minimalist sanctuary, felt like a refuge. She closed the door softly and sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. They were killing her. Slowly, methodically, with pills and legal documents and casual cruelty. Her own children, planning her funeral while she bought groceries, discussing her estate while she struggled to remember why she'd walked into rooms. But she wasn't dead yet, and despite months of artificial confusion, her mind felt clearer now than it had in ages. The real Eloisa Wright, the woman who had negotiated million-dollar deals and built an empire from nothing, was still here, still fighting. She reached for her phone with steady fingers and scrolled to a number she'd been calling more frequently in recent weeks. Marcus Rodriguez, the elder law attorney she'd contacted when she first noticed discrepancies in her bank statements. Their meetings had been brief, cautious. She thought she was being paranoid, worried about minor financial irregularities. Now she knew better. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. "Mrs. Wright? Are you all right?" "Marcus," she said quietly, glancing toward her bedroom door. "I need to see you. Tonight, if possible. It's urgent." "Of course. What's happened?" Eloisa looked around her bedroom, at the 4-poster bed Victoria wanted to replace, at the family photos on the dresser showing happier times, at the life she'd built that was being systematically dismantled beneath her feet. "I just attended my own funeral planning," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "And I think it's time to come back from the dead." Marcus Rodriguez's hand tightened around his coffee cup as he watched Eloisa Wright navigate the narrow space between tables at the daily grind. a small cafe 20 minutes outside Millbrook Heights. Even at 8 in the morning, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned not to trust her own body. Each step measured, each movement deliberate. But her eyes, when they met his across the dimly lit cafe, held a sharpness that contradicted the frail figure making her way toward him. The cafe had been his suggestion when she'd called the night before, her voice tight with a controlled fury he'd never heard in their previous meetings. Away from Millbrook Heights. Away from the watchful eyes of her family and their social circle. Away from the suffocating perfection of her neighborhood where secrets were currency and appearances were everything. She settled into the booth across from him with a soft sigh, declining his offer to help. "I drove myself," she said simply, as if that small act of independence was a victory worth noting. "First time in weeks I felt present enough to trust myself behind the wheel." Marcus studied her face in the morning light filtering through the cafe, thus front windows. The confusion that had clouded their previous meetings was gone, replaced by something harder, more focused. This was the woman who had built Wright Properties from nothing, who had turned grief into empire when her husband died. "You said last night that you attended your own funeral planning." He kept his voice low, though the nearest customers were 3 tables away, absorbed in their newspapers and morning routines. "Tell me what happened." Eloisa wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "Black, no sugar," he noted. Another sign of the mental clarity she'd been lacking in recent weeks. Victoria, James, Sophia, David Sterling, and Harold Finch. All gathered in my living room like I was already in the ground. Her voice carried the bitter edge of betrayal, but underneath it was something else. Calculation. "They've had me declared legally incompetent, Marcus. Preliminary filing approved yesterday morning, according to Harold." The words hit him like a physical blow, though he'd suspected something like this was coming. The missing funds from her accounts, the forged signatures, the gradual isolation from her own financial affairs, it all pointed to a systematic takeover. But hearing the confirmation still made his jaw clench with a familiar rage. "They were discussing asset transfers," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. "Victoria wants to redecorate my bedroom once I'm gone. James is already appraising my art collection. And the medications." She paused, looking down at her hands. "They've been managing my pills, Marcus. The confusion, the memory lapses, the episodes where I couldn't think straight. It wasn't age. It was them." Marcus felt the old fury rise in his chest, the same anger that had driven him to specialize in elder abuse cases after watching his grandmother waste away under similar circumstances. "What medications? Do you remember the names?" "Anxiety medication, sleep aids." Victoria said Dr. Walsh increased the dosage last month. James mentioned something about interactions causing disorientation, but that it was for my safety. The word came out like she was tasting something spoiled. My own son, using his medical knowledge to erase me. She looked up then, and Marcus saw the full force of her intelligence burning in those dark eyes. This wasn't the confused, fragile woman who had been meeting with him for the past month, struggling to understand minor discrepancies in her bank statements. This was the matriarch who had negotiated million-dollar deals, who had outmaneuvered competitors twice her size in the real estate market. Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "I've been investigating the financial irregularities you brought to my attention. What I've found goes far beyond what we initially discussed." He opened the folder and spread several bank statements across the table. "These show systematic transfers from your accounts over the past 8 months. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums." Eloisa leaned forward, her finger tracing the highlighted transactions. Her business mind engaged immediately, processing patterns and amounts with the skill that had made her fortune. 37,000 in January, 52 in March, 78 in June. She looked up sharply. "Someone's been testing the waters, seeing how much they could take before I noticed. Victoria has been using power of attorney documents to access your accounts." Marcus pulled out photocopies of legal papers, documents that bear your signature, but... He hesitated, studying her face. "But I never signed them." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "Show me." He slid the papers across the table, watching as she examined the signatures with the eye of someone who had signed thousands of contracts over the decades. Her face went pale. "It's good," she admitted quietly. "Very good. But see here?" She pointed to the loop in the reg of Wright. "I haven't made that flourish since my arthritis got worse 3 years ago. And this?" She indicated the date. "February 15th. That was the day I was in the hospital for my heart palpitations. I couldn't have signed anything." Marcus made notes on his legal pad, his handwriting quick and precise. Years of elder law had taught him to document everything, to build cases that could withstand the scrutiny of courts and the manipulation of desperate families. We can prove forgery, but that's just the beginning. The incompetency filing is the real threat. Once that's finalized, they have legal control over every aspect of your life. How do we reverse it? The question was direct, businesslike. She wasn't asking if it was possible. She was asking how to make it happen. Marcus felt a familiar stirring of respect for a client who refused to be a victim. "It's difficult," he said honestly. "The legal system is designed to protect vulnerable adults, which means, once someone is declared incompetent, the burden of proof shifts dramatically. We'd need to demonstrate that the original determination was fraudulent, that you're capable of managing your own affairs, and that your family has been systematically undermining your mental capacity. The medications. Exactly. But we need medical evidence. Independent testing to show what's in your system, documentation of the effects, proof that the symptoms of dementia were artificially induced." Marcus paused, studying her carefully. "How long since you last took the pills they were giving you?" Eloisa thought back to the previous evening, to her decision to skip the neat row of tablets Victoria had organized in her weekly pill dispenser. "Last night. I didn't take them last night." "And this morning?" "Nothing. I woke up feeling myself. For the first time in months, I felt like myself." Marcus felt hope stir in his chest, the same hope he'd felt too rarely in cases like this. Most of the time, by the time families contacted him, it was too late. The victim was too far gone, too systematically destroyed to fight back. But Eloisa Wright was still here, still fighting. "I need to arrange medical testing immediately," he said, pulling out his phone. "Blood work, cognitive assessment, everything. We need to document your current state and what's been done to you." "What about my family?" The question carried pain, despite her efforts to keep her voice steady. "Do I confront them? Do I pretend nothing has changed?" Marcus had seen this moment in every elder abuse case. The terrible realization that the people who should protect you are the ones destroying you. The choice between family and survival. "For now, you continue the performance," he said gently. "You go home, you take the pills they give you, you act confused and compliant. We need time to gather evidence, to build an airtight case before they realize what's happening." "How long can I keep taking those medications without permanent damage?" The question revealed both her pragmatism and her fear. Marcus had consulted with toxicologists on similar cases, understanding the delicate balance between gathering evidence and preserving the victim's health. "Dr. Sarah Chen specializes in cases like this," he said, scrolling through his contacts. "She can evaluate what you've been given and determine safe limits." "But Eloisa..." He looked up from his phone. "Why are they doing this now? What changed?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the cafe window at the parking lot where her Mercedes sat next to his practical Honda. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of family dynamics. "Victoria's always lived beyond her means, even after marrying David. James's businesses keep failing. I think there might be gambling involved, though he's never admitted it. Sophia's been secretive about her finances for years." She turned back to Marcus. "But the trigger was probably my conversation with Richard's doctor last month. I mentioned wanting to update my will, maybe establish some charitable foundations. They must have panicked." "How much are we talking about?" $47 million, give or take. Properties, investments, business holdings." She said it matter-of-factly, the way someone else might discuss grocery lists. enough to solve all their problems and create new ones. Marcus felt the familiar chill that came with understanding the stakes. This wasn't just about control or pride. This was about enough money to destroy lives, to corrupt souls, to turn children into predators. They won't stop, he said quietly. Once this process begins, they can't back down without risking everything. If you fight back successfully, they face criminal charges, civil liability, complete social destruction. They're committed now. Eloisa nodded slowly, processing the implications. Then we'd better make sure I win. The steel in her voice reminded Marcus why she'd been successful in a cutthroat business dominated by men twice her size. Wright Properties hadn't been built on luck or charity. It had been built on intelligence, determination, and an absolute refusal to be underestimated. There's something else, Marcus said, hesitating. The personal nature of what he was about to share wasn't something he discussed with clients. But Eloisa Wright wasn't just any client. My grandmother, Maria Rodriguez. She died 5 years ago in a situation very similar to yours. Eloisa's expression softened slightly. What happened? My uncle convinced her to sign over power of attorney when she started having small memory issues. Natural aging, nothing dramatic. But he used it to systematically drain her accounts, sell her house, move her to a care facility where she deteriorated quickly. Marcus's voice tightened with old pain. By the time we realized what was happening, she was too far gone to testify on her own behalf. She died, believing her family had abandoned her. I'm sorry. It's why I do this work. Why I won't let it happen again if I can help it. He met her eyes across the table. You're not just a client to me, Mrs. Wright. You're my chance to get justice for every elderly person who's been betrayed by the people who should love them most. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his, a gesture that managed to be both maternal and conspiratorial. Then we'd better make this count, hadn't we? Marcus felt the familiar surge of purpose that had driven him through law school, through the lean years of building his practice, through every difficult case that had brought him to this moment. We're going to destroy them legally, ethically, and completely. But first, we need to make sure you survive long enough to see it happen. The morning sun had climbed higher while they talked, filling the cafe with golden light that seemed to illuminate the path ahead. It would be dangerous, complicated, heartbreaking. But for the first time in months, Eloisa Wright was fully awake and ready to fight for her life. Dr. Sarah Chen's medical practice occupied the 3rd floor of a nondescript building in downtown Hartford, far enough from Millbrook Heights to avoid the social circles that might report back to Victoria. Eloisa sat in the sterile examination room later that afternoon, rolling up her sleeve for what felt like the 10th vial of blood to be drawn. The phlebotomist worked with efficient silence while Dr. Chen reviewed the preliminary test results that had already come back from the lab's rush processing. Marcus had made the appointment with his characteristic thoroughness, explaining the situation to Dr. Chen in clinical terms that somehow made the betrayal sound even more heinous. Systematic poisoning, induced cognitive decline, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The words carried legal weight that somehow hurt more than the simple truth. Her children were trying to kill her slowly enough to avoid suspicion. The initial toxicology screen confirms what we suspected, Dr. Chen said, her voice carefully professional but tinged with barely controlled anger. She was younger than Eloisa had expected, perhaps 45, with the focused intensity of someone who had seen too many cases like this. You have dangerous levels of lorazepam and scopolamine in your system. The combination is deliberate. Deliberate how? Eloisa asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Lorazepam is a benzodiazepine, anti-anxiety medication that, in therapeutic doses, helps with panic disorders. But in higher doses, especially when combined with other substances, it causes confusion, memory loss, and what appear to be symptoms of dementia. Dr. Chen pulled up a chair, sitting at eye level with her patient. Scopolamine is more unusual. It's derived from plants in the nightshade family, sometimes called devil's breath. In controlled medical settings, it's used for motion sickness. In the doses you've been receiving, it causes disorientation, compliance, and significant memory impairment. Eloisa felt cold, despite the warm examination room. How would someone get scopolamine? It can be ordered online if you know what you're looking for, but more commonly, someone with medical knowledge would know how to extract it from plants or obtain it through veterinary suppliers. Dr. Chen's expression hardened. Your son, James? Marcus mentioned he has medical training? Pre-med before he dropped out. He's maintained an interest in pharmacology over the years. The admission tasted bitter. She remembered being proud of James's scientific mind, his careful attention to detail. Now those same qualities had been turned against her with surgical precision. Dr. Chen made notes on her tablet. The combination suggests someone who understands drug interactions. They've been giving you just enough to create cognitive symptoms without causing obvious poisoning. It's sophisticated. How long would it take for these substances to clear my system? With your age and kidney function, probably 72 hours for most of it. But the psychological effects, the confidence issues, the self-doubt about your mental capacity, those can linger longer. Dr. Chen studied the test results again. Mrs. Wright, based on these levels, you should be nearly catatonic right now. The fact that you're sitting here having a coherent conversation suggests remarkable cognitive resilience. Eloisa thought about the months of confusion, the moments when she'd questioned her own sanity, wondered if age was finally catching up to her in the cruelest possible way. I've been taking the medication for months. Why am I clearer today? You missed doses last night and this morning, correct? When Eloisa nodded, Dr. Chen continued. These substances have relatively short half-lives when not continuously administered. Your natural cognitive function is reasserting itself as the chemicals metabolize out of your system. The relief was overwhelming. She wasn't losing her mind. She wasn't sliding into the gentle dementia that had claimed her sister Patricia. Her children had been systematically erasing her intelligence, her personality, her very self. But the woman she'd always been was still intact underneath their chemical assault. Doctor, I need to continue taking some amount of these medications while we gather evidence. Is that safe? Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose. You want to keep poisoning yourself? I need my family to believe nothing has changed while my attorney builds a case against them. If I suddenly seem completely lucid, they'll know something's wrong. The physician was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with the ethics of the situation. I can provide you with lower-dose medications that will create mild confusion without the severe cognitive impairment. But Mrs. Wright, you're playing a dangerous game. These people have already demonstrated they're willing to harm you. If they suspect you're aware of their plan, then I'd better make sure they don't suspect. Eloisa's voice carried the steel that had built Wright Properties. How quickly can you have detailed medical reports ready? 24 hours for the complete toxicology panel and cognitive assessment. I'll document everything, the levels in your system, the expected effects, my professional opinion that these symptoms were artificially induced. Dr. Chen hesitated. There's something else. I've been reviewing your medical records from Dr. Walsh's office. She's prescribed some unusual medication combinations for you over the past year. Eloisa felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Patricia Walsh has been my doctor for 30 years. She delivered all 3 of my children. That might explain why she trusted their reports about your condition without conducting more thorough examinations. But Mrs. Wright, some of these prescriptions don't make clinical sense unless... Dr. Chen pulled up the records on her computer screen. Unless someone was specifically requesting medications that would interact to produce cognitive symptoms. The betrayal cut deeper. Dr. Walsh, who had held her hand through Richard's death, who had celebrated her business successes, who had watched her children grow up, she had been an unwitting accomplice in their plan. I need to go home, Eloisa said quietly. I need to see what else I've been missing. Marcus was waiting in the lobby when she emerged from Dr. Chen's office, his expression grim. How bad is it? Bad enough that I should be dead or completely incapacitated. She handed him the preliminary test results Dr. Chen had printed out. They've been very thorough. He scanned the medical terminology, his jaw tightening with each line. This is evidence of attempted murder, Eloisa. Not just elder abuse. Actual attempted murder through systematic poisoning. The words should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a familiar surge of competitive fury. Her children had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated their mother's capacity for survival and revenge. "Take me home," she said. "I have some detective work to do." The drive back to Millbrook Heights passed in focused silence. Eloisa's mind was racing, connecting patterns she'd missed during the months of artificial confusion. James's increased visits to, quote, check on her health, Victoria's helpful organization of her weekly medications, Sophia's careful observation and note-taking during family gatherings. Even David's seemingly casual questions about her estate planning and financial management. They had been building a case for her incompetency while simultaneously creating the very symptoms they were documenting. The clinical precision of it was breathtaking in its cruelty. As Marcus pulled into her circular driveway, Eloisa noticed James's car parked near the garage. Her middle child rarely visited during weekdays, claiming his various business ventures kept him too busy. But here he was, probably preparing her evening medications with the same careful attention he'd once applied to his pre-med studies. "What's our story if he asks where you've been?" Marcus asked quietly. "Grocery shopping. I'll mention feeling confused about the drive, maybe ask him to check my blood pressure. Give him a chance to play the concerned son while he prepares tonight's dose of chemical warfare." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Marcus studied her face in the afternoon light filtering through the windshield. "Are you sure you can handle this? Pretending everything is normal while knowing what you know?" Eloisa thought about Richard, about the empire she'd built from nothing, about the life she'd created through sheer determination and intelligence. Her children thought they were dealing with a confused old woman whose mind was slipping away. They were about to learn they'd declared war on someone who had never lost a battle that truly mattered. "Marcus, I've spent 50 years in real estate negotiations where everyone was trying to cheat me out of something. This is just another transaction. Except this time, the stakes are my life instead of my money." She got out of the car and walked toward her front door with the measured steps of someone whose balance wasn't quite what it used to be. But inside, her mind was sharp as a blade, cataloging every detail, every opportunity, every weapon in what had become a fight for her very existence. James appeared in the foyer as she entered, his face arranging itself into an expression of concern that might have fooled her a week ago. Now she could see the calculation behind his worried frown, the way his eyes assessed her gait and alertness level with clinical detachment. "Mom, there you are. I was getting worried when I didn't find you home." He moved to take her purse, his hands gentle but possessive. "How are you feeling today? You look tired." "A bit confused, actually." She allowed a slight tremor to enter her voice, the performance beginning. "I drove to the store, but then I couldn't remember what I needed to buy. Spent an hour wandering the aisles." She looked at him, with what she hoped appeared to be mild distress. "It's frightening, James. These episodes are getting worse." His expression shifted to something that might have been genuine sympathy if she hadn't known the truth. "Dr. Walsh mentioned that might happen. The important thing is that you're safe now." He guided her toward the kitchen with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Have you taken your afternoon medication?" "I'm not sure. I can't remember if I took the pills this morning or just thought about taking them." She sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, playing the part of a woman whose mind was slipping away. "Could you check my pillbox? I don't want to double dose." James moved to the counter where her weekly medication organizer sat in its neat row of compartments. His movements were practiced, efficient. The routine of someone who had been managing her pills for months, but now she could see it for what it really was. The methodical preparation of her daily poisoning. "Looks like you missed your morning dose," he said, shaking 2 pills into his palm. "And you're due for the afternoon supplements Dr. Walsh prescribed." Eloisa watched him reach into the cabinet above the sink, pulling out a bottle she didn't recognize. The label was partially obscured by his fingers, but she caught enough to see it wasn't from her regular pharmacy. This was something James had obtained separately, something he'd been adding to her prescribed medications. "What's that one?" she asked, injecting just the right note of confused concern into her voice. "Just a new supplement Dr. Walsh recommended for cognitive health. Natural herbs that might help with the memory issues." His voice was smooth, practiced, but she could see the tension in his shoulders as he prepared what she now knew was another dose of scopolamine. "That's thoughtful of you to help me with all this," she said, accepting the pills with a shaking hand. She palmed one of the tablets while appearing to put both in her mouth, then reached for the glass of water he offered. "I don't know what I'd do without you and your sisters looking out for me." The lie tasted worse than the remaining pills she actually swallowed. But as she watched James's face relax into satisfied relief, she felt the familiar thrill of a successful negotiation. He thought he was managing a confused old woman. He had no idea he was being studied by someone who was about to dismantle his life with the same systematic precision he'd used to try to destroy hers. "Mom, I was thinking it might be good for me to stay over tonight. Just to make sure you're okay, help you with the evening medications." His concern sounded genuine, but she could see the real reason in his eyes. He wanted to monitor her reaction to the new dose, to document any increased confusion for their legal case. "That would be wonderful," she said, meaning it in ways he couldn't possibly understand. Tonight, while James thought she was sleeping off another dose of chemical confusion, she would be searching his belongings, photographing evidence, and building the case that would destroy him and his sisters. The game had begun in earnest, and for the first time in months, Eloisa Wright was fully awake to play it. James busied himself in her kitchen with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had appointed himself guardian. Eloisa watched him through the peripheral vision she'd learned to use in decades of real estate negotiations, noting how he moved through her space with subtle ownership. He opened cabinets that had once required her permission to access, reorganized her counter space to better accommodate the growing collection of pill bottles, and checked expiration dates on her food with the patronizing thoroughness of someone managing a child. "I thought I'd make us some dinner," he said, his back to her as he rummaged through her refrigerator. "Something light. You haven't been eating enough lately." The casual criticism stung, mainly because it was probably true. The medications had suppressed her appetite along with everything else, turning food into another chore she struggled to remember. But she could feel her natural hunger returning as the chemicals left her system, her body remembering what it felt like to want things again. "That's thoughtful," she managed, adding a slight waver to her voice. "I do forget to eat sometimes. Everything seems harder lately." James turned to study her with what appeared to be genuine concern, though she could now see the clinical assessment beneath his worry. He was cataloging her symptoms, measuring her decline, gathering ammunition for their legal case. The realization that her son had been studying her deterioration like a lab specimen made her hands tremble with genuine emotion, which, she realized with dark irony, would only reinforce his perception of her frailty. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you about some practical things while I'm here." He pulled out a chair across from her at the kitchen table, settling in with the patient expression of someone prepared to explain complicated concepts to a child. "Victoria and David have been helping me organize some paperwork to make things easier for you." Here it comes, she thought. The next phase of their systematic theft, dressed up as concern for her well-being. She arranged her features into a mask of confused gratitude. "What kind of paperwork?" "Just some legal documents that will help us take care of you better. Power of attorney updates, some changes to your will that reflect your current situation." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. "I know legal stuff has been confusing for you lately, so we've simplified everything." Eloisa stared at the folder, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, the moment they would try to steal her life's work with her own signature. But she had a secret weapon now, the small digital recorder Marcus had given her that morning, currently tucked into the pocket of her cardigan and activated by a button designed to look like decorative trim. "I trust you children to know what's best," she said softly, the words scraping her throat like broken glass. "You've all been so patient with me." James's face softened with what might have been genuine emotion. For a moment, she glimpsed the boy he'd been before ambition and desperation had corrupted him. The sweet child who had brought her dandelions and declared them better than roses because they grew wild and free. "We love you, Mom. We just want to make sure you're protected." He opened the folder and pulled out several documents marked with yellow sticky notes. "These are just updates to reflect that Victoria will be handling your finances, and that if something happens to you, the estate transfers will be streamlined." The clinical language couldn't disguise what he was asking her to sign. Her own financial death warrant. She reached for the papers with a shaking hand, hoping the tremor appeared to be frailty rather than rage. "Should I read through all of this?" she asked, looking at the dense legal text with apparent bewilderment. "You don't need to worry about the details. Harold Finch prepared everything to meet legal standards." James pulled a pen from his shirt pocket and placed it beside the documents. "Just sign where the tabs indicate." She picked up the pen, letting it wobble slightly in her grip as she scanned the first document. The language was carefully crafted to appear protective, while being utterly devastating. Victoria would gain complete control over all financial decisions, with no requirement for Eloisa's consent or even notification. The estate would bypass probate entirely, transferring immediately upon a doctor's certification of her incompetence or death. "This says Victoria will manage my accounts," she said, injecting a note of hesitation into her voice. "But what if I want to buy something? What if I need money for groceries or medication? Victoria will take care of all of that. You won't have to worry about money anymore." The way James said it made it sound like a gift rather than the theft it was. "Think of it as retirement from all those stressful financial decisions." Eloisa signed the first document with deliberate unsteadiness, making sure the recorder captured every word of their conversation. Each signature felt like a small death, but she reminded herself that this performance was buying her time to build the case that would destroy them all. "There's one more thing," James said as she finished signing. "Victoria wanted to discuss some changes to your living situation." The kitchen door opened before she could respond, and Victoria herself swept in with her characteristic blend of elegance and barely concealed impatience. She moved through the space like she already owned it, her eyes automatically cataloging changes and improvements she would make once Eloisa was gone. "James, good, you're getting the paperwork handled." Victoria's voice carried the brisk efficiency of someone managing a business transaction. "Mother, you look confused. Have you been taking your medications properly?" "James has been helping me," Eloisa replied, playing up the gratitude in her voice. "I get so mixed up about which pills to take when." Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. "That's exactly what we need to discuss. Dr. Walsh thinks it might be safer if you move to a care facility where professionals can monitor your medications and episodes." The words hit like a physical blow. They weren't just stealing her money. They were planning to institutionalize her, to lock her away where her growing confusion could be managed and documented until they could justify her complete disappearance from their lives. A care facility? Eloisa let real fear creep into her voice, which wasn't difficult given the circumstances. "The best money can buy," Victoria assured her, pulling out glossy brochures from her designer handbag. "Sunset Manor specializes in memory care. You'd have your own room, professional nursing staff, activities designed for people with your condition." She spread the brochures across the table like vacation pamphlets, but Eloisa could see them for what they really were: prison advertisements. Beautiful, expensive prisons, where wealthy families could warehouse their inconvenient elderly relatives while living off their assets. "When would this happen?" she asked weakly. "Soon," Victoria replied, not specifying exactly how soon. "We want to get you settled before winter. The transition will be easier while you're still somewhat functional." The casual cruelty of the phrase, "somewhat functional," nearly broke her performance. This was her daughter, the child she had carried for 9 months, nursed through midnight fevers, celebrated through every milestone of her life. Now Victoria was discussing her disposal like she was broken furniture to be donated to charity. But Eloisa held her composure, nodded with confused acceptance, and continued playing the role of a woman too addled to understand her own destruction. Every word was being recorded, every cruel assumption documented. They thought they were managing a feeble-minded old woman, but they were actually confessing their crimes to someone who was very much awake and taking careful notes. "I just want what's best for the family," she said quietly, the double meaning lost on them entirely. Victoria's smile broadened with satisfaction. "That's all we want too, Mother. That's all we've ever wanted." The lie hung in the air between them, heavy with years of resentment and greed that Eloisa was only beginning to understand. But as she sat at her own kitchen table, signing away her freedom while secretly recording her children's betrayal, she felt the familiar thrill of a complex negotiation reaching its critical phase. They thought the game was over. They had no idea it had barely begun. The kitchen fell into an uncomfortable silence after Victoria finished spreading the care facility brochures across the table. Eloisa could feel the weight of unspoken tensions in the room, the kind of charged atmosphere that preceded explosions in business negotiations. She had learned long ago to recognize the signs, the way people avoided eye contact, the measured breathing, the careful positioning of bodies that suggested alliances and oppositions. James shifted in his chair, his fingers drumming against his thigh in a nervous rhythm she remembered from his childhood. "Victoria, maybe we should discuss the timeline privately first. There's no rush to. There's every rush." Victoria's voice cut through his hesitation with surgical precision. "Dr. Walsh is already expressing concerns about Mother's capacity to live alone. If we wait much longer, the state might intervene with their own solutions." She turned to face her brother directly, and Eloisa saw something predatory in her daughter's eyes that made her stomach clench with recognition. This was the look Victoria had worn as a teenager when she wanted something. Cold calculation disguised as concern. "James, you know as well as I do that Mother's condition is deteriorating rapidly. Last week she called me, Patricia. Yesterday you found her standing in the driveway at 2 a.m, unable to remember how she got there." Victoria's recitation of symptoms felt rehearsed, clinical. "We have a small window to act in her best interests before the decision gets taken away from us entirely." Eloisa frowned, trying to access memories that felt clouded and uncertain. Had she really been found wandering outside? The thought terrified her. Not because it might have happened, but because she couldn't distinguish between genuine confusion and what might have been staged incidents designed to build their case. "But moving her to Sunset Manor feels so permanent," James said quietly. "Maybe we could try in-home care first. Someone to help with medications and daily tasks." "With what money?" The question came from the kitchen doorway, where David Sterling stood surveying the scene with the cool assessment of someone calculating risks and benefits. Eloisa hadn't heard him enter, but he moved through her house with the same proprietary confidence as his wife, already mentally rearranging furniture and claiming territory. "The estate is substantial," James replied, though uncertainty crept into his voice. David pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be financial documents. "The liquid assets are more limited than you think. The bulk of your mother's wealth is tied up in real estate holdings and investments that can't be easily accessed without triggering tax implications." He looked up from his screen. "Quality in-home care runs $30,000 a month. Sunset Manor is actually more cost-effective, and they have specialists who understand her particular needs." The casual discussion of her finances while she sat 3 feet away felt surreal. Eloisa had spent decades building right properties, carefully structuring investments and holdings to maximize both growth and flexibility. The idea that her wealth was somehow limited or difficult to access was absurd, unless they were already hemorrhaging money in ways she wasn't aware of. "How do you know so much about Mother's financial structure?" James asked, and for the first time Eloisa heard a note of suspicion in his voice. David's smile was thin, professional. "Victoria asked me to review the portfolio when your mother started having her episodes. Someone needs to understand the big picture to make informed decisions. Someone like you?" The new voice belonged to Sophia, who appeared in the kitchen doorway with the silent grace that had characterized her movement since childhood. Unlike her siblings, she didn't enter the room immediately. Instead, she leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, studying the family tableau with those dark eyes that miss nothing. Someone with legal and financial expertise. David corrected smoothly. This situation requires careful management to protect everyone's interests. Sophia's laugh was soft but contained an edge that made everyone turn toward her. Everyone's interests. How democratic of you. She finally entered the kitchen, moving to the counter where she could observe all of them simultaneously. Though I'm curious about whose interests we're prioritizing when you've been transferring funds from mother's accounts without proper documentation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria's face went pale, while David's expression hardened into something approaching hostility. I don't know what you're implying, David began. I'm not implying anything. Sophia pulled a small notebook from her jacket pocket, the same one Eloisa had noticed her carrying at family gatherings. I'm stating facts. Transfers of $78,000 in June, $92,000 in August, $105,000 last month. All authorized by power of attorney documents that mother supposedly signed while she was in the hospital for heart palpitations. Eloisa felt the pieces clicking together with horrifying clarity. The hospital stay in February had been brief, a reaction to stress that she'd attributed to overwork and Richard's anniversary. But she'd been unconscious for several hours, vulnerable, and unable to sign anything. Those transfers were for legitimate expenses, Victoria said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Medical consultations, legal fees, care management. Whose medical consultations? Sophia's question cut through her sister's explanation. Because I've been documenting our family's recent activities, and I haven't found receipts for $275,000 worth of medical care. The kitchen erupted into chaos. Victoria lunged toward Sophia, demanding to see her notebook, while David moved to block access to the legal documents still spread across the table. James sat frozen in his chair, his face cycling through confusion, realization, and growing horror. What are you writing in that thing? Victoria's voice rose to a pitch Eloisa hadn't heard since her daughter was 16 and caught sneaking out of the house. Insurance, Sophia replied calmly, holding the notebook just out of her sister's reach. Detailed records of dates, times, conversations, financial transactions. Everything that might be relevant if questions arise about our handling of mother's care. Questions from whom? David's voice carried a lawyer's wariness. Sophia shrugged. Authorities. Medical boards. Whoever might be interested in whether we've been acting in mother's best interests or our own. The silence that followed was pregnant with implications. Eloisa watched her children's faces, seeing them truly for perhaps the first time in years. Victoria, whose desperation was finally showing through her perfect facade. James, whose moral conflict was written in every line of his posture. Sophia, whose intelligence had been consistently underestimated by everyone, including herself. We need to stick together, Victoria said finally, her voice dropping to the urgent whisper of conspiracy. Whatever differences we have, we're family. We protect each other. The way we're protecting Mother? James's question was barely audible, but it carried the weight of accumulated guilt. Victoria spun on him with sudden fury. Don't you dare develop a conscience now, James. You've been feeding her the medications for months. You've been documenting her symptoms, building the medical case for her incompetence. You're in this as deep as any of us. The slap came without warning. Victoria's hand connected with James's cheek with a sharp crack that seemed to echo off the kitchen walls. He recoiled more from shock than pain, his hand rising automatically to touch the reddening mark. Victoria! Eloisa's protest was instinctive, the reaction of a mother watching one child attack another. But the word came out stronger than she'd intended, without the confused weakness she'd been cultivating. All three of her children turned to stare at her. Sudden wariness, replacing their family drama. She could see them recalculating, wondering if their mother was more aware than they'd assumed. I don't like fighting, she added quickly, letting her voice waver back toward frailty. You're all such good children. I don't understand why there's so much anger. The moment passed, but something fundamental had shifted in the room's dynamics. James touched his cheek again, his eyes focusing on Victoria with new understanding. Sophia closed her notebook and slipped it back into her pocket, But not before Eloisa caught a glimpse of pages covered in careful handwriting. Dates, quotes, observations that could either protect her or destroy her, depending on whose side Sophia was ultimately playing. "I think Mother needs to rest," David said finally, his lawyer's instincts recognizing the need to de-escalate before someone said something that couldn't be taken back. These conversations can be overwhelming for someone in her condition. But as they filed out of the kitchen, leaving Eloisa alone at the table surrounded by care facility brochures and legal documents bearing her forged signature, she realized she had learned something crucial. Her children's alliance was fracturing under the pressure of guilt, greed, and mutual suspicion. James's conscience was awakening. Sophia was playing a deeper game than anyone realized, and Victoria's desperation was making her increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. The recorded conversation in her pocket felt like a weapon now, evidence of their conspiracy captured in their own words. But it was also proof of how far they were willing to go, how completely they had abandoned any pretense of love or loyalty in favor of financial gain. As she sat alone in her kitchen, listening to their muffled arguments drift down from the second floor, Eloisa Wright began to understand that she wasn't just fighting for her money or her freedom. She was fighting for the very soul of her family, and she was no longer certain it was worth saving. The grandfather clock in Eloisa's hallway chimed 11 times as she sat in her darkened study, staring at the small digital recorder Marcus had given her. The device looked innocuous enough, no larger than a matchbox, designed to blend seamlessly with the decorative buttons on her cardigan. But the conversations it had captured over the past 3 hours contained enough evidence to destroy her children's lives completely. She pressed play one more time, listening to Victoria's cold calculation as she discussed asset transfers, James's nervous compliance as he detailed her medication schedule, David's casual dismissal of her autonomy as he planned her institutionalization. Each word felt like a knife twist, but she forced herself to listen with the analytical detachment that had built Wright Properties into an empire. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Safe to call?" She typed back quickly, "Yes, they're all upstairs arguing." The phone rang within seconds, Marcus's voice tight with controlled urgency. "How did it go?" "Better than we hoped. They signed documents transferring financial control to Victoria, discussed moving me to a care facility, and revealed they've been stealing from my accounts for months." Eloisa paused, listening to the muffled voices from the second floor. "And Sophia has been documenting everything. We may have an unexpected ally." "Or another enemy with better documentation skills," Marcus cautioned. "Don't trust anyone until we know their true motivations." The lawyer's paranoia was well-founded, but Eloisa's business instincts were telling her something different about her youngest daughter. Sophia's playing a longer game than the others realize. The question is whether she's protecting herself or positioning for a larger share of the inheritance. Either way, she could be useful. What about James? You mentioned he seemed conflicted. Eloisa touched her cheek, remembering the sharp crack of Victoria's hand against her son's face. Victoria slapped him when he questioned the timeline. "He's starting to understand what they've become, but I'm not sure he has the courage to break ranks completely." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "We need to move faster than planned. If their alliance is fragmenting, Victoria will become more desperate and unpredictable. Desperate people make dangerous choices. What's our next step?" "Detective Morrison. I called him after our meeting this afternoon, gave him a preliminary overview of the situation. He's agreed to meet with us tomorrow morning, but he's skeptical. Elder abuse cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute, especially when the family appears to be acting out of concern." Eloisa felt a familiar surge of competitive energy, the same feeling she'd gotten before closing particularly challenging real estate deals. What does he need to be convinced? Evidence of criminal intent. The medical records Dr. Chen provided are crucial, but we need to prove systematic theft, forgery, and conspiracy. The recording you made tonight is a good start, but we need more. She looked around her study, taking in the mahogany desk where she'd built her business empire, the filing cabinets that contained decades of financial records, the safe hidden behind her late husband's portrait. Her children thought she was too confused to manage her own affairs, but they had underestimated both her organizational skills and her memory for detail. Marcus, I need you to file emergency motions tomorrow morning. Freeze all asset transfers. Challenge the incompetency declaration. And request a court-appointed guardian ad litem to investigate their claims about my mental state. That's aggressive. Once we file those motions, they'll know we're actively fighting back. Good. Let them know. I'm tired of pretending to be helpless while they dismantle my life. Her voice carried the steel that had intimidated competitors twice her size. But we need to be strategic about the timing. Victoria mentioned that Dr. Walsh is already expressing concerns about my capacity to live alone. If we move too quickly, they might accelerate their plans. Marcus was quiet, thinking through the legal implications. There's something else. I've been researching David Sterling's law firm, looking for any leverage we might have. He's been taking cases on contingency that his firm doesn't know about, skimming settlement fees to fund his lifestyle. Embezzlement? More sophisticated than that, but equally criminal. He's been running a parallel practice using the firm's resources while keeping the profits for himself. If that comes to light, he faces disbarment and criminal charges. Eloisa felt the pieces clicking together with satisfying precision. So he's not just helping steal my money, he's already stealing from his own partners. That gives us additional leverage. Exactly. But Eloisa, there's something we need to discuss. The level of systematic abuse you've endured, the evidence we're uncovering. This isn't just about getting your money back. Your children could face serious prison time. Are you prepared for that outcome? The question hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of 20 years of birthday parties and family dinners, Christmas mornings, and graduation ceremonies. Her children had been poisoning her slowly, stealing her money systematically, and planning her institutionalization methodically. But they were still her children. They made their choice when they decided I was worth more dead than alive, she said finally. I'm not responsible for the consequences of their actions. There's one more thing. Detective Morrison is going to want to meet you in person, assess your mental capacity himself. Are you prepared to drop the confused act completely? Eloisa thought about the performance she'd been maintaining. The careful balance between appearing lucid enough to be credible while confused enough to avoid suspicion. How much does he know? Everything. The medical evidence, the financial irregularities, your family's history. He's approached this like any other criminal investigation, which means he's checked out our story independently. And what did he find? Marcus's voice carried a note of satisfaction. That Eloisa Wright is one of the sharpest businesswomen in Connecticut, with a reputation for meticulous record-keeping and strategic thinking. Also that her children have been living well beyond their means for years, with James having significant gambling debts and Victoria facing potential foreclosure on her house. The confirmation that her instincts about her children's motivations were accurate brought no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for the family they might have been under different circumstances. There's something else, Marcus continued. Morrison ran background checks on everyone involved. Dr. Walsh has been prescribing unusual medication combinations for several elderly patients over the past 2 years. She might be an unwitting accomplice in more cases than just yours. Eloisa felt a chill of recognition. Patricia has always been trusting, almost to a fault. If someone presented her with a convincing medical scenario, especially family members she's known for decades, she might not question their requests. Which makes her both a victim and a potential ally. If we can demonstrate that she was manipulated into prescribing medications that harmed you, she becomes a witness rather than an accomplice. The strategy was taking shape with the complexity of a major real estate transaction, requiring careful timing, multiple contingencies, and absolute precision in execution. But unlike her business deals, the stakes here weren't just financial. They were personal, emotional, and potentially deadly. Marcus, I need to ask you something personal. Eloisa hesitated, unsure how to frame the question. Why are you doing this? I know about your grandmother, but this goes beyond professional obligation. His answer came without hesitation. Because I failed her. I was in law school when my uncle started manipulating her, focused on my studies and my career while she was being systematically destroyed by someone she trusted. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to save her. The pain in his voice was raw, immediate, as if his grandmother had died yesterday instead of 5 years ago. She died believing her family had abandoned her, that she was a burden we were better off without. The last time I saw her, she couldn't remember my name, but she remembered the hurt. The confusion and fear never left her eyes. Eloisa felt tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed throughout this entire ordeal. Not for herself, but for the young lawyer who had watched helplessly as his grandmother was destroyed by the same kind of systematic cruelty her own children were inflicting on her. "You can't save her by saving me," she said gently. "No. But I can make sure no one else dies the way she did, forgotten and betrayed by the people who should have protected her." His voice strengthened with resolve. "Your children think they're dealing with a confused old woman and a small-town lawyer who's in over his head. They have no idea they're facing someone who's been preparing for this fight for 5 years." The grandfather clock chimed midnight, marking the transition from one day to the next. Upstairs, the arguing voices had finally quieted, presumably as her children settled into their respective bedrooms. Victoria in the guest room she was already claiming as her own, James in his childhood bedroom where she'd once nursed him through measles and nightmares, Sophia in the attic space she'd converted to an art studio years ago. "Tomorrow morning, we meet with Detective Morrison," Eloisa said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades making decisions that affected millions of dollars and hundreds of lives. "Then we file the emergency motions and let my children know that their mother isn't as helpless as they assumed. Are you sure you're ready for this? Once we start, there's no going back. Your relationship with your children will be permanently destroyed." Eloisa looked around her study one last time, taking in the photographs of family vacations and business achievements, the awards and commendations that marked a life well lived. Her children had already destroyed their relationship with her the moment they decided she was worth more as a victim than as a mother. "They destroyed our family when they chose money over love," she said quietly. "I'm just going to make sure they pay the appropriate price for that choice." As she hung up the phone and prepared to spend what might be her last night in the house she'd called home for 40 years, Eloisa Wright felt the familiar thrill of a complex negotiation reaching its critical phase. Her children thought they held all the advantages: legal control, medical authority, and the presumption of good intentions. They were about to learn that their mother had been playing chess while they were playing checkers, and checkmate was only a few moves away. The pre-dawn darkness pressed against Eloisa's bedroom windows when a soft knock interrupted her restless vigil. She had given up on sleep hours ago, instead sitting in the wingback chair by her window, watching the familiar shadows of her garden while her mind raced through strategies and contingencies. The knock came again, barely audible, followed by Sophia's voice whispering her name. "Come in," Eloisa said quietly, though she kept her voice pitched to suggest someone awakened from troubled sleep rather than someone who had been plotting since midnight. Sophia slipped through the doorway like a ghost, closing the door with practiced silence. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, she looked younger than her 32 years, vulnerable in a way that reminded Eloisa of the artistic child who had once brought her crayon drawings of impossible flowers and rainbow-colored horses. "I couldn't sleep," Sophia said, settling cross-legged on the floor beside Eloisa's chair in the same way she had as a little girl seeking comfort after nightmares. "I keep thinking about what happened in the kitchen tonight. About Victoria hitting James, about the things David said." Eloisa studied her youngest daughter's face in the pale light, searching for signs of deception or manipulation. Sophia had always been the hardest to read, the child who observed everything and revealed nothing, who could spend hours creating elaborate artwork that somehow captured emotions she never expressed directly. "Family fights are difficult," Eloisa said carefully, maintaining the slightly confused tone she'd been cultivating. "I don't understand why everyone seems so angry lately." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the Persian rug. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of decision, as if she had been wrestling with this conversation for weeks. "Mom, I need to tell you something. About the notebook I've been carrying, about what I've been writing down." She looked up, meeting Eloisa's eyes directly. I know what they're doing to you. I know about the medications, about the forged documents, about the money they've been stealing. The words hung between them in the darkness, a confession that could change everything or destroy them both. Eloisa felt her heart racing, but she forced herself to respond with confused concern rather than the sharp relief she actually felt. I don't understand. What medications? Sophia reached into her jacket and pulled out the leather notebook Eloisa had seen at family gatherings. But now, in the intimate darkness of the bedroom, it looked less like casual record-keeping and more like evidence gathering. The pills James gives you aren't just what Dr. Walsh prescribed. He's been adding scopolamine, increasing the dosages of the benzodiazepines, creating combinations that make you confused and compliant. Sophia's voice was clinical, precise. I've been documenting dates, dosages, your reactions. I have photographs of the pill bottles he hides in his car, recordings of conversations where they discuss your episodes, like they're managing a medical experiment. Eloisa stared at the notebook, processing the implications. If Sophia had been gathering evidence for months, she potentially had documentation that could destroy Victoria and James completely. But the crucial question remained, why? Why are you telling me this? Eloisa asked, allowing some of her natural sharpness to emerge. Why help me? Sophia's smile was sad, knowing. Because I remember who you really are. Because I've watched them erase you piece by piece, and it's been breaking my heart. She paused, her fingers tightening on the notebook, and because I know that if they succeed in having you declared incompetent, or worse, they'll turn on each other next. Victoria will find a way to cut James out of the inheritance, and they'll both assume I'm too naive to be a threat. The calculation beneath the emotion was pure Wright family DNA, Eloisa realized. Sophia had inherited her mother's strategic mind, but unlike Victoria and James, she had also retained her conscience. What do you want from me? Eloisa asked directly. I want to help you fight back. But I also want to protect myself. Sophia opened the notebook, revealing pages of careful handwriting, timestamps, and what appeared to be financial calculations. I've been preparing for the possibility that their plan would eventually work, that you'd be institutionalized or worse. I need evidence that I wasn't part of the conspiracy, that I tried to prevent it. Eloisa felt a surge of pride despite the circumstances. Her youngest daughter had been playing the longest game of all, positioning herself as both witness and potential ally, while her siblings focused on short-term theft and manipulation. Show me what you have, Eloisa said, dropping the confused act entirely. Sophia's relief was visible as her mother's sharp intelligence reasserted itself. She flipped through the notebook, revealing a systematic documentation of abuse that was both heartbreaking and legally devastating. June 15th, James crushed 2 additional pills into your morning coffee, claiming they were supplements. You spent the day unable to remember where you put your car keys, calling me Patricia twice. Victoria arrived in the afternoon to help organize your medications, taking photos of you looking confused that she claimed were for your medical records. She turned the page. July 23rd, David brought legal documents for you to sign while you were heavily medicated from the previous night's dose. You signed with a shaky hand, and he immediately photographed the signatures. Victoria made comments about your declining handwriting being concerning evidence for Dr. Walsh. Page after page documented a systematic campaign of psychological and pharmaceutical abuse, each entry time-stamped and cross-referenced with financial transactions, medication schedules, and family meetings. It was the work of someone with both investigative instincts and artistic attention to detail. Sophia, this is... Eloisa paused, overwhelmed by the scope of her daughter's documentation. This is enough to put them in prison. I know. The question is what we do with it. Sophia closed the notebook carefully. I've been waiting for the right moment, the right ally. I couldn't go to the police alone. Victoria and David have too many connections, and James could claim I was lying to protect myself. But if you're willing to fight back, if you have legal representation... Marcus Rodriguez, Eloisa said quietly. Elder law specialist, we've been building a case. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. You've been pretending. The confusion, the compliance, it's all been an act. Not entirely. The medications they've been giving me are real, and the effects have been devastating. But I've been weaning myself off them gradually, with medical supervision. My mind is clearer than it's been in months. Eloisa studied her daughter's face. The question is whether I can trust you. Mom, I've been documenting their crimes for months, risking my own safety to gather evidence that could save your life. If I wanted to betray you, I would have done it already. The logic was sound, but Eloisa had learned not to trust logic alone where family was concerned. What about James? You said he's reaching a breaking point. Sophia's expression darkened. He tried to confess to me 2 days ago, said he couldn't live with what they were doing, that he wanted to stop giving you the extra medications, but Victoria threatened to frame him entirely for the poisoning scheme if he backed out. She has evidence that makes it look like the whole plan was his idea. Is it possible it was his idea? No. Sophia's response was immediate. Certain. James is weak, but he's not evil. This has Victoria's fingerprints all over it. The systematic approach, the legal manipulation, the long-term planning. James just provided the medical knowledge because he was desperate and afraid. A soft sound in the hallway made both women freeze. Footsteps, careful but audible, moving toward Eloisa's bedroom door. Sophia quickly closed her notebook and slipped it back into her jacket, while Eloisa settled back into her chair with the practiced ease of someone who had been feigning frailty for weeks. The footsteps paused outside the door, and they heard the soft creak of floorboards as someone shifted their weight. After several tense seconds, the sounds moved away, heading back toward the guest bedroom, where Victoria was sleeping. "She's suspicious," Sophia whispered. "Victoria's been watching you more carefully lately, looking for signs that you're not as confused as you appear. Then we need to move faster than planned." Eloisa's voice carried the authority of someone who had made difficult decisions under pressure for decades. "I'm meeting with Detective Morrison this morning, filing emergency motions to freeze assets and challenge the incompetency declaration. Are you prepared to testify?" Sophia nodded without hesitation. "I've been preparing for this moment for months. But Mom, there's something else you need to know. Dr. Walsh has been getting suspicious about the medication interactions she's been prescribing. She called me yesterday, asking questions about your symptoms that suggest she's starting to realize she's been manipulated." The implications were significant. If Dr. Walsh was willing to admit she had been deceived, it would transform her from an unwitting accomplice into a powerful witness for their case. Would she testify? "I think so. She's always genuinely cared about you, and if she understands that Victoria and James have been using her prescriptions to harm you, she'll be horrified enough to cooperate." Eloisa felt the pieces of her counter-strategy clicking into place with satisfying precision. Marcus with his legal expertise and personal investment in justice. Detective Morrison with his law enforcement authority and investigative resources. Dr. Walsh with her medical credentials and professional integrity. And now Sophia with her months of careful documentation and insider knowledge. "There's one more thing," Sophia said quietly. "James has been talking about going to the police himself, confessing everything before Victoria can frame him, but he's terrified of her. And he's convinced that admitting his role will mean prison time and complete family destruction." "He's probably right about the prison time," Eloisa said honestly. "What he's done to me constitutes attempted murder through systematic poisoning. The legal system won't treat that lightly, regardless of his motivations." Sophia was quiet for a moment, processing the implications for her brother. Is there any way to protect him? Any possibility of leniency if he cooperates fully? The question revealed the complexity of family loyalty even in the face of ultimate betrayal. Sophia was willing to destroy Victoria and David to protect her mother, but she still hoped to save James from the full consequences of his actions. "That depends on Marcus and Detective Morrison," Eloisa said. "Sometimes cooperation and genuine remorse can make a difference in sentencing. But James will have to choose his own path. Continue following Victoria's lead toward mutual destruction, or find the courage to do the right thing regardless of the consequences." The eastern sky was beginning to lighten outside the bedroom windows, marking the transition from night to the day that would determine the future of the Wright family. In a few hours, Eloisa would meet with Detective Morrison and begin the legal process that would either restore her life and freedom or escalate the conflict to potentially deadly levels. "Are you ready for this?" Sophia asked, echoing the question Marcus had posed the night before. Eloisa looked at her youngest daughter, the child she had once underestimated, who had spent months quietly gathering the evidence that might save them both. "I've been ready since the moment I walked into that living room and heard them planning my funeral. The only question is whether your siblings are ready for what comes next." As dawn broke over Millbrook Heights, two Wright women sat in comfortable conspiracy, planning the destruction of the family that had already destroyed itself through greed and betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that in trying to eliminate their mother and sister, Victoria and James had created the very alliance that would bring about their own downfall. Detective Ray Morrison had the weathered look of someone who had spent 23 years watching families destroy each other over money, sex, and power. His office in the Hartford Police Department reflected that experience, sparse, functional, with filing cabinets that had seen better decades, and a coffee maker that produced something resembling motor oil. But his eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who had learned to see through lies with the same ease most people saw through windows. "Mrs. Wright," he said, gesturing to the metal chair across from his desk, "I'll be honest with you. Elder abuse cases are some of the hardest to prosecute, especially when the perpetrators are family members with clean records and apparent good intentions." Eloisa settled into the uncomfortable chair, noting how Morrison watched her movements with clinical assessment. She had dressed carefully for this meeting, business casual, minimal makeup, her gray hair styled but not overly done. The goal was to appear competent without seeming to be performing competence. "I understand your skepticism, Detective. If someone had told me 6 months ago that my children were systematically poisoning me while stealing my life savings, I would have questioned their sanity as well." Marcus sat beside her, a thick folder of evidence balanced on his lap. "Detective Morrison, the medical documentation alone should be sufficient to establish criminal intent. Dr. Chen's toxicology reports show levels of scopolamine and lorazepam that could only have been administered deliberately." Morrison pulled out a legal pad and uncapped a pen that looked like it had survived several investigations. "Walk me through the timeline. When did you first suspect something was wrong?" Eloisa had rehearsed this part with Marcus, understanding that her credibility depended on presenting a coherent narrative despite months of artificial confusion. "The financial irregularities began appearing in January. Small amounts at first, then larger transfers that I couldn't account for. But I attributed the memory lapses to age, to grief, to the stress of managing my business." "When did the physical symptoms begin?" "Looking back, probably November of last year. Fatigue, confusion, difficulty concentrating. My children were very concerned, very helpful with my medications and medical appointments. It never occurred to me that their concern might be—" She paused, still struggling with the reality of what her family had done. "Manufactured." Morrison made notes, his expression remaining neutral. "Your attorney mentioned recordings of family conversations. I'll need to hear those." Marcus produced the small digital recorder, setting it on the desk between them. "This contains approximately 3 hours of conversation from yesterday evening. The defendants discuss asset transfers, medication management, and plans to institutionalize Mrs. Wright, all while she was present but apparently unaware." The detective listened to selected portions of the recording, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Victoria's casual discussion of redecorating Eloisa's bedroom. David's clinical assessment of her financial assets. James's nervous compliance as he detailed her medication schedule. The callous planning of her life's dismantlement, discussed as casually as ordering lunch. "This is damning," Morrison admitted when the recording finished, "but it's also circumstantial. A good defense attorney could argue that they were making difficult decisions for someone they genuinely believed was mentally incompetent." "What about the forged signatures?" Marcus pulled out photocopies of the power of attorney documents. "Mrs. Wright can demonstrate that she was physically unable to sign these documents on the dates indicated." Morrison examined the papers with the eye of someone who had seen his share of fraudulent documents. The forgery is good, professional quality. But proving forgery isn't the same as proving criminal conspiracy. We need evidence of deliberate intent to harm. Eloisa felt the familiar frustration of dealing with bureaucratic caution, the same institutional hesitancy she had encountered in business, when people were more concerned with avoiding mistakes than achieving justice. Detective, what would constitute sufficient evidence in your opinion? Testimony from co-conspirators, medical professionals who were deceived into enabling the abuse, financial records showing systematic theft with clear intent to defraud. Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her face. The problem is that elder abuse often looks exactly like concerned family members trying to protect someone who can't protect themselves. Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out another folder. What if we had documentation from someone inside the conspiracy? Someone who witnessed and recorded the planning, the execution, and the cover-up. Before Morrison could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the display and frowned. "Excuse me, I need to take this." He answered with professional briskness, but his expression shifted as he listened to whoever was on the other end. "When? Are you certain?" "No. Don't let them leave until I get there." He hung up and looked at Eloisa and Marcus with new urgency. "That was Officer Martinez at Millbrook Heights General Hospital. Your son James Wright is in the emergency room, apparently suffering from what he's calling a medication reaction. He's asking to speak with a police officer about something he describes as a family emergency." The implications hit Eloisa like a physical blow. James had reached his breaking point, just as Sophia had predicted. But whether he was having a genuine medical crisis or staging one to gain sympathy was unclear. "We need to get to the hospital immediately," Marcus said, already gathering his papers. Morrison stood, reaching for his jacket. "Mrs. Wright, I want you to understand something. If your son is prepared to confess to his role in this conspiracy, it changes everything. But it also means your family is about to be destroyed in a very public, very permanent way." Eloisa met his gaze steadily. "Detective, my family destroyed itself the moment my children decided I was worth more dead than alive. I'm simply making sure they face the appropriate consequences for that choice." The drive to Millbrook Heights General took 20 minutes through morning traffic that seemed determined to delay justice. Marcus used the time to make urgent phone calls, filing emergency motions with the court to freeze all asset transfers and challenge the preliminary incompetency declaration. "Judge Patterson will hear our emergency petition at 2 o'clock this afternoon," he reported as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. "Harold Finch has been served with papers requiring him to appear and explain his role in the fraudulent legal documents." Morrison led them through the hospital's main entrance, with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to crime scenes and crisis situations. James was in the emergency department, pale and shaking in a hospital gown, connected to an IV that was presumably flushing whatever chemicals he had ingested from his system. "Mr. Wright," Morrison said, showing his badge to the attending physician, "I understand you requested to speak with law enforcement?" James looked up at them with eyes that held the desperate clarity of someone who had finally decided to tell the truth, regardless of the consequences. When he saw his mother standing in the doorway, his face crumpled with genuine remorse. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry." The profanity seemed to surprise him as much as anyone else. "I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant for any of this to happen." Dr. Patricia Walsh appeared in the doorway behind them, her face haggard with exhaustion, and something that looked like horror. "Eloisa, thank God you're here. James has been telling me things, terrible things about medications and—" She paused, looking at James with professional concern mixed with personal betrayal. "I think I've been a fool." Morrison pulled out his recorder, setting it on the bedside table with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Wright, I need to advise you that anything you say can be used against you in court. Do you understand your rights?" James nodded weakly. "I want to confess. I want to tell you everything. But I need immunity. Or at least consideration for cooperation, because what Victoria and David have planned." He looked at his mother with desperate urgency. "Mom, they're not going to stop. The incompetency hearing is scheduled for Friday, and if it goes through, if you're declared legally unable to manage your affairs." "What happens Friday?" Eloisa asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Sunset Manor has a bed reserved for you. Victoria has already signed the admission papers, claiming medical emergency authority. Once you're isolated from any outside contact." James's voice broke. "Mom, they're not planning for you to come back out." The hospital room fell silent except for the steady beep of monitoring equipment and the distant sounds of hospital activity. Dr. Walsh sank into a visitor's chair, her face pale with the realization of how her medical authority had been manipulated. "James," Morrison said quietly, "are you telling me that your family was planning to have your mother committed to a care facility against her will?" "Not just committed. Victoria found a place that specializes in what they call end-stage dementia care. Patients who are admitted there, they don't typically live very long. The medication protocols, the isolation from family, the depression that sets in when someone realizes they've been abandoned." James met his mother's eyes. Victoria researched the statistics. Average life expectancy after admission is 8 months. Dr. Walsh made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "James, what have you done? What have we all done?" Morrison's expression had shifted from professional skepticism to barely controlled anger. "Mr. Wright, I need you to be very clear about what you're alleging. Are you saying that your sister was planning to commit your mother to a facility where she would die within months?" "I'm saying Victoria found a legal way to murder our mother that would look like natural causes." James's voice steadied with the relief of finally telling the truth. The systematic poisoning was just the setup, creating documented evidence of mental incapacity. The real plan was always institutionalization, followed by medical neglect, disguised as compassionate care. Eloisa felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Her daughter hadn't just been stealing her money, or even trying to control her life. Victoria had been planning her actual death, timed and executed with the precision of a business transaction. Marcus was already on his phone, speaking urgently with someone at the courthouse. "Judge Patterson, this is Marcus Rodriguez. I need an emergency hearing moved up immediately. We have new testimony suggesting imminent danger to my client's life." Morrison turned to Dr. Walsh, who was staring at James with growing horror. "Doctor, I need to know exactly what medications you prescribed for Mrs. Wright and how those prescriptions were managed by her family." Patricia Walsh looked up with the expression of someone who had just realized she had been an unwitting accomplice to attempted murder. "Detective, I think I need to call my lawyer. And then I think I need to tell you everything I know about how I was manipulated into nearly killing one of my oldest patients." The beeping of James's heart monitor accelerated as he struggled with the physical and emotional toll of his confession, but his eyes remained fixed on his mother with desperate hope for forgiveness that might never come. "Mom," he whispered, "can you ever forgive me for what I've done to you?" Eloisa looked at her middle child, weak, guilty, but finally choosing courage over complicity. The question of forgiveness would have to wait. Right now, they had less than 6 hours to prevent Victoria from completing a murder that had been 8 months in the planning. "James," she said quietly, "redemption starts with stopping your sister before she kills me. Are you prepared to testify against Victoria and David in court this afternoon?" He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'll tell them everything. Every detail, every plan, every moment of this nightmare. But Mom, Victoria has lawyers, connections, money. She's not going to go down without destroying everyone in her path." Detective Morrison was already calling for additional officers, understanding that they were no longer dealing with simple elder abuse but with a sophisticated conspiracy to commit murder. The game had changed, and the stakes had just become a matter of life and death. The emergency courtroom at Hartford Superior Court had the austere formality of a place where lives were routinely destroyed and rebuilt with the strike of a gavel. Judge Catherine Patterson presided from her elevated bench with the weary authority of someone who had seen every variation of human cruelty, disguised as family concern. At 2:15 in the afternoon, the Wright family's destruction would finally be made official. Eloisa sat in the front row behind the plaintiff's table, flanked by Marcus and Detective Morrison. Across the aisle, Victoria and David Sterling occupied similar positions behind the defense table, their expensive attorney whispering urgent strategies while Harold Finch sat pale and shaken beside them. James remained at the hospital under police guard, his recorded confession playing through speakers that made his broken voice echo off the wood-paneled walls. "I've been giving my mother scopolamine for 6 months," James's voice continued from the recording, crushing it into her food, dissolving it in her drinks. Victoria provided the schedule, David monitored the legal implications, and I provided the medical expertise to make it look like natural cognitive decline. Judge Patterson's expression grew darker with each revelation. She had seen elder abuse cases before, but the systematic precision of this conspiracy was breathtaking in its cruelty. "Mr. Sterling," she addressed David directly, "your client is accused of orchestrating a conspiracy to commit murder through systematic poisoning and fraudulent institutionalization. How do you plead?" David Sterling rose with the controlled arrogance of someone who had never faced genuine consequences for his actions. Even now, facing criminal charges that could destroy his career and his freedom, he maintained the cool calculation that had made him successful in corporate law. "Not guilty, Your Honor. My client acted in good faith to protect her mother from the unfortunate effects of age-related cognitive decline. Any medications administered were prescribed by Dr. Walsh and managed according to her instructions." The lie was delivered with such professional confidence that Eloisa almost admired its audacity. But she could see the cracks in David's facade, the way his hands trembled slightly as he shuffled through his legal papers, the perspiration on his forehead despite the cool courtroom temperature. Marcus stood to respond, his voice carrying the controlled fury of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Dr. Walsh was systematically deceived by the defendants, who manipulated her medical authority to obtain prescriptions for medications that were then administered in dangerous combinations to create artificial symptoms of dementia." Dr. Patricia Walsh sat in the witness section, her face haggard with the realization of how completely she had been used. When called to testify, she approached the witness stand with the hesitant steps of someone walking toward her own professional execution. "Dr. Walsh," Marcus began gently, "how long have you been treating Mrs. Wright?" 32 years, Patricia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I delivered all 3 of her children. I've been her physician through every major medical event of her adult life." "And in your professional opinion, based on your long relationship with Mrs. Wright, did her symptoms of cognitive decline appear consistent with natural aging?" Patricia was quiet for a long moment, struggling with the implications of her answer. "No, the onset was too rapid, the symptoms too specific. But her children were so concerned, so helpful with managing her care, that She paused, tears beginning to flow. "I trusted them. They provided detailed reports of her behavior at home, brought her to appointments when she seemed too confused to come alone, asked thoughtful questions about medication interactions." "Did they ever request specific medications?" Victoria asked about anti-anxiety medications that might help with her mother's agitation. James inquired about sleep aids that could help with her insomnia and wandering episodes. David researched the legal implications of various medication protocols for patients with diminished capacity. Patricia looked up at Judge Patterson with desperate honesty. Every request seemed medically appropriate and motivated by genuine concern. Marcus walked to the evidence table and picked up a bottle of pills. "Dr. Walsh, do you recognize this medication?" Patricia examined the label with growing horror. "This is scopolamine. I never prescribed this. This isn't even from my pharmacy." According to James Wright's testimony, this medication was obtained through veterinary suppliers and administered to Mrs. Wright in doses calculated to create specific cognitive symptoms. "Were you aware that your legitimate prescriptions were being supplemented with additional drugs?" "No." The word came out as a sob. If I had suspected that they were using my medical authority to poison their own mother." She looked across the courtroom at Victoria, who sat stone-faced beside her attorney. "I would have called the police immediately." Victoria Sterling rose suddenly, her composure finally cracking under the weight of accumulating testimony. "Your Honor, This is a witch hunt orchestrated by a confused elderly woman and an opportunistic lawyer looking to make a name for himself. Mrs. Sterling, please remain seated, Judge Patterson commanded sharply. You will have your opportunity to present your defense. But Victoria was beyond judicial control now, her voice rising with the desperate fury of someone watching her carefully constructed plan collapse in real time. My mother has been mentally incompetent for months. She can barely remember our names, can't manage her own medications, wanders around the house at night calling for people who died years ago. That's because you were poisoning her. Sophia's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. She had been sitting quietly in the back, but now she rose with the leather notebook that had documented months of abuse. Every symptom you just described was artificially created through systematic chemical manipulation. Judge Patterson looked surprised by the interruption, but gestured for Sophia to approach the bench. And you are? Sophia Wright Martinez, Your Honor, the defendant's youngest daughter and a witness to the conspiracy. She opened her notebook, revealing pages of careful documentation. I have detailed records of every medication administered, every forged signature, every conversation where they discussed their mother's elimination as if it were a business transaction. Victoria spun toward her sister with undisguised rage. You little bitch. You've been documenting us? You've been planning to betray your own family? I've been trying to save our mother's life while protecting myself from your insanity. Sophia replied calmly. She handed the notebook to Marcus, who began flipping through pages with growing amazement. Your Honor, Marcus said, this documentation includes photographs of medication bottles, recordings of family conversations, and financial records showing systematic theft from Mrs. Wright's accounts. Ms. Martinez has essentially provided us with a complete record of the conspiracy from inside the family. David Sterling was on his feet now, his professional composure completely abandoned. Your Honor, this is clearly a family member looking to protect herself by shifting blame to her siblings. Her testimony is inherently suspect. Is it? Detective Morrison rose from his seat, approaching the bench with an evidence bag. Because we also have independent evidence of Mr. Sterling's embezzlement from his law firm, using company resources to fund his personal lifestyle, while stealing from elderly clients including Mrs. Wright. The revelation hit David like a physical blow. His face went white as he realized that his parallel crimes had been discovered, that his sophisticated theft from his own partners would be exposed along with his role in Eloisa's systematic abuse. That's completely unrelated to these proceedings, he stammered. Not when it establishes motive and demonstrates a pattern of financial crimes targeting vulnerable individuals, Morrison replied. Mr. Sterling, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, and elder abuse. The courtroom erupted as Morrison moved toward David with handcuffs. Victoria screamed at her husband to say nothing, while Harold Finch tried desperately to distance himself from clients who had clearly manipulated him into enabling their crimes. But it was Eloisa who commanded the room's attention when she rose slowly from her seat, her voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of someone who had spent decades managing complex negotiations. Stop. The single word carried such power that everyone turned toward her, judge, attorneys, family members, court officers. For the first time in months, Eloisa Wright stood fully revealed as the formidable woman she had always been, her artificial frailty cast aside like a discarded costume. Victoria, James, David. She looked at each of them in turn, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to say. You have systematically poisoned me, stolen my money, forged my signature, and planned my murder. You have turned my own physician into an unwitting accomplice and corrupted the legal system to serve your greed. She moved toward them slowly, each step deliberate and powerful. But more than that, you have destroyed something that can never be rebuilt. You have taken the love I had for my children and turned it into evidence against you. Victoria's face contorted with desperate fury. You don't understand the pressure we've been under. The debts, the expectations, the way you've controlled everything with your money and your success. We were desperate. You were greedy, Eloisa replied simply, and you made a fundamental miscalculation. You assumed that because I was old, I was weak. You assumed that because I loved you, I wouldn't fight back. You assumed that because you were my children, I would protect you even from the consequences of your own actions. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small device, the digital recorder Marcus had given her, still running after hours of testimony. Every conversation we've had over the past week has been recorded. Every cruel assumption, every casual discussion of my elimination, every moment when you revealed who you really are beneath the facade of concerned children. Victoria lunged toward her mother with a scream of pure rage, but Detective Morrison intercepted her before she could make contact. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she continued screaming at Eloisa with the unleashed fury of someone who had lost everything. "You vindictive old bitch! You could have just died quietly like you were supposed to. But no, you had to fight back, had to destroy your own family to protect your precious money." Eloisa looked at her eldest daughter with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been so cold. "I didn't destroy this family, Victoria. You did, the moment you decided I was worth more dead than alive." James's voice came through the courtroom speakers one final time as his recorded confession reached its conclusion. "I know I'm going to prison. I know my life is over. But I need my mother to know that somewhere underneath all the weakness and greed and cowardice, I still love her. And I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry for what we've done." Judge Patterson's gavel fell with the finality of thunder, but the sound seemed somehow anticlimactic after the emotional devastation that had just played out in her courtroom. "Mrs. Wright," she said quietly, "I'm issuing an immediate restraining order against all 3 defendants. Your assets will be unfrozen, your competency will be fully restored, and criminal charges will proceed against everyone involved in this conspiracy." She looked around the courtroom at the wreckage of what had once been a family. "In 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a more systematic betrayal of trust, or a more complete perversion of family loyalty. The defendants will remain in custody pending trial." As court officers led Victoria and David away in handcuffs, their expensive attorney already calculating damage control strategies, Eloisa remained standing in the center of the courtroom. She had won. Her money was safe, her freedom was restored, her life was her own again. But the victory felt hollow as she watched her children being taken away to begin paying for crimes that would haunt them forever. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear Victoria still screaming threats and accusations, while David maintained the sullen silence of someone whose calculated risks had finally caught up with him. Sophia approached her mother slowly, uncertain about her reception after months of deception. "Mom, I know you can't forgive me for waiting so long to act, for documenting everything instead of trying to stop it sooner." Eloisa looked at her youngest daughter, the only one who had chosen to save rather than destroy, who had risked her own safety to gather evidence that might protect them both. "Sophia, you made the hardest choice of all. You chose truth over family loyalty, evidence over emotion. That took more courage than I had any right to expect from someone your age." They stood together in the emptying courtroom, mother and daughter united by the destruction of everything they had once believed about family and love and loyalty. Outside, the autumn sun was setting over Hartford, marking the end of the Wright family as it had existed and the beginning of something smaller, harder, but perhaps more honest. Marcus approached them with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who had finally achieved justice for his grandmother's memory. "Eloisa, it's over. They'll all serve significant prison time, and you'll never have to see any of them again if you don't want to." She nodded, understanding that her children had made their choices and would now live with the consequences. But as she walked out of the courthouse into the fading daylight, supported by the 2 people who had chosen to save rather than destroy her, Eloisa Wright felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The simple, powerful satisfaction of being fully, completely, undeniably alive. The war was over, and she had won. But the price of victory had been the complete destruction of everything she had once thought worth protecting. In trying to kill her, her children had killed themselves instead, leaving behind only the wreckage of love, corrupted by greed and the hollow echo of family bonds, severed beyond any possibility of repair. 6 months later, spring had returned to Millbrook Heights with the stubborn persistence of life, asserting itself after the harshest winter. Eloisa Wright stood in her redesigned kitchen, watching through windows that had been cleaned of the shadows that once seemed to cling to every surface. The pills bottles that had once cluttered her counters were gone, replaced by a simple daily vitamin and the prescription blood pressure medication that Dr. Sarah Chen monitored personally. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the systematic elimination of lies had allowed sunlight to penetrate corners that had been dark for months. She had redecorated Victoria's claimed spaces with deliberate defiance, replacing her daughter's cold minimalism with the warm colors and comfortable furniture that reflected her own preferences rather than someone else's vision of who she should be. Marcus Rodriguez sat at her kitchen table, reviewing the final documents from the criminal trials that had concluded the previous week. His hair had gained more gray during their months of legal warfare, but his eyes held the satisfaction of someone who had finally achieved justice for his grandmother's memory. Victoria got 12 years for elder abuse, conspiracy, and fraud, he reported, checking his notes. David got 15, with the embezzlement charges from his law firm adding to his sentence. Harold Finch received 3 years probation for his role as an unwitting accomplice, but his law license has been suspended indefinitely. Eloisa nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor sadness at the news. Her eldest daughter and son-in-law had made their choices and were now living with the consequences. The appeals process would likely continue for years, but the fundamental judgment was final. They had tried to murder her for money, and the legal system had held them accountable. "What about James?" Marcus's expression softened slightly. 18 months, with the possibility of early release for good behavior and continued addiction treatment. The judge took his cooperation into account, along with testimony from his therapists about genuine remorse and psychological manipulation by Victoria. Through her window, Eloisa could see the small apartment complex where James now lived, having been released from county jail 3 weeks earlier. He had written her letters during his incarceration, pages of apology and explanation that she had read without responding. The question of forgiveness remained complicated, tangled with love and betrayal in ways that might never fully resolve. "Has he tried to contact you again?" Marcus asked gently. "Yesterday. He called to tell me he's been sober for 4 months and attending therapy twice a week." She paused, considering the conversation that had left her feeling emotionally exhausted. He wants to make amends, but he doesn't understand that some actions create permanent consequences regardless of the sincerity of the apology. The kitchen door opened with Sophia's characteristic quiet grace. She had moved back into her childhood home 6 months ago, ostensibly to help with Eloisa's recovery, but actually because she had nowhere else to go. Victoria's arrest had triggered a cascade of investigations that revealed Sophia's art-dealing business had been funded by stolen money, making her financially as well as emotionally dependent on her mother's forgiveness. "Mom, Dr. Walsh is here for your monthly checkup," Sophia announced, setting her portfolio on the counter. She had been working on a series of paintings that documented their family's destruction, dark, complex pieces that captured the emotional truth of betrayal in ways that legal testimony could never express. Dr. Patricia Walsh entered with the hesitant manner of someone still processing her role in the near murder of a longtime patient. The medical board had cleared her of criminal wrongdoing but censured her for failing to recognize signs of elder abuse. She had since implemented new protocols for monitoring elderly patients and training staff to identify potential family manipulation. "Eloisa, you look wonderful," Patricia said, and for the first time in months it wasn't a medical assessment disguised as social pleasantry. "Your color is good, your cognitive function tests continue to be excellent, and the toxicology screens show no residual effects from the systematic poisoning." They completed the checkup with the efficiency of old friends rebuilding trust. Patricia's guilt would probably never fully disappear, but she had channeled it into advocacy work, speaking at medical conferences about the sophisticated ways that families could manipulate healthcare providers into enabling abuse. "There's something I wanted to discuss with you," Patricia said as she packed her equipment. "I've been asked to testify before a congressional subcommittee about elder abuse in healthcare settings. They want to use your case as an example of how current protections can be circumvented by determined family members." Eloisa considered the request. Her story had already been covered extensively by local media, turning her into an unwilling symbol of resilience for elderly people facing family betrayal. The attention had been uncomfortable but potentially valuable if it prevented similar crimes. What would testifying involve? Sharing your experience, explaining how the systematic approach your children used could be recognized and prevented by better training and oversight. Patricia paused. It would mean more publicity, more intrusion into your privacy. Marcus looked up from his papers. Eloisa, you've already done more than anyone could expect to bring attention to this issue. You don't owe the world anything more. But she was already thinking beyond personal comfort to the broader implications. How many other elderly people were being systematically poisoned by families who had learned to game the medical and legal systems? How many Dr. Walshes were being manipulated into enabling abuse without recognizing the warning signs? I'll do it, she decided. But I want Marcus there as legal counsel, and I want Sophia to document the experience for her art project. Sophia looked up from her portfolio with surprise. You want me to paint the congressional hearing? I want you to paint the truth. All of it. The systematic abuse, the family betrayal, the legal battle, and the aftermath. Future generations should understand how easily love can be corrupted by greed, and how difficult it is to rebuild trust once it's been systematically destroyed. The afternoon passed in comfortable productivity. Marcus finished reviewing the asset recovery documents that had restored Eloisa's financial control and implemented new safeguards against future manipulation. Sophia worked on preliminary sketches for her congressional series, while fielding calls from galleries interested in exhibiting her family destruction collection. Patricia made notes for her upcoming medical conference presentation about recognizing elder abuse warning signs. As evening approached, Detective Ray Morrison arrived for what had become a monthly check-in. The criminal cases were closed, but he continued monitoring the family situation with the persistence of someone who understood that legal resolution didn't always translate to personal safety. Any contact from Victoria or David? He asked, settling into a chair that had become his unofficial spot during these visits. Victoria's lawyers have been filing appeals, but she hasn't tried to communicate directly, Eloisa replied. David's completely focused on his own legal problems. The law firm partnership he destroyed is pursuing civil penalties that will probably bankrupt him even after he gets out of prison. Morrison nodded with satisfaction. Good. The restraining orders remain in effect, and they'll be monitored if they're released early for any reason. They discussed practical security measures and updated emergency contacts, but the conversation felt more routine than urgent. The immediate danger had passed, replaced by the long-term process of rebuilding a life that had been systematically dismantled by the people who should have protected it. After everyone left, Eloisa and Sophia sat together in the living room, where the family's destruction had begun that day 6 months earlier, when she'd returned from grocery shopping to find them planning her funeral. The space had been completely redecorated, but the memories remained vivid despite the changed surroundings. Do you ever regret fighting back? Sophia asked quietly. Do you ever wonder if there was a way to save the family without destroying it? Eloisa considered the question, understanding that her youngest daughter was really asking whether forgiveness and justice could coexist, whether families could survive ultimate betrayal through anything other than complete reconstruction. The family was already destroyed the moment Victoria decided I was worth more dead than alive, she said finally. I didn't destroy it by fighting back. I simply refused to let them bury me along with their victims. She looked around the living room that had once been the stage for her planned elimination, now transformed into a space that reflected her own choices rather than someone else's vision of her diminishing life. But I do think about legacy differently now. Money, property, investments, those are just things that can be stolen or lost or squandered. The real inheritance I can leave is the knowledge that you should never let anyone convince you that you're too old, too confused, or too weak to fight for your own life. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing words that carried the weight of months of systematic abuse and recovery. James called me yesterday. He wants to see you, to try to explain his actions in person. And what did you tell him? That explanations and apologies are easy, but rebuilding trust requires consistent actions over years, not conversations over coffee. Sophia met her mother's eyes. I told him that if he really wants to make amends, he should focus on preventing other families from going through what we did, rather than seeking absolution for what he can't undo. The wisdom in her daughter's response reminded Eloisa that something positive had emerged from their family's destruction. Sophia had been forced to develop strength, intelligence, and moral clarity that might never have surfaced under ordinary circumstances. Mom, there's something else. The gallery in New York wants to exhibit my entire family series, and they want to donate a portion of the proceeds to elder abuse prevention organizations. They're calling it Inheritance of Betrayal. Eloisa smiled, feeling pride in her daughter's artistic ability to transform trauma into something that might prevent similar tragedies. Your father would have been proud of you. He always said your art would change the world someday. As the sun set over Millbrook Heights, Eloisa Wright sat in her reclaimed living room with her youngest daughter, planning congressional testimony and art exhibitions that would turn their family's destruction into weapons against similar abuse. She had lost 2 children to greed, and gained a deeper understanding of her own strength. She had lost her illusions about family loyalty and gained clarity about what truly mattered. The money they had tried to steal was secure now, protected by legal safeguards that would prevent future manipulation. But more importantly, she had reclaimed her life, her mind, and her right to determine her own legacy. 6 months ago, she had been a confused elderly woman being systematically murdered by her own children. Tonight, she was a survivor, an advocate, and a living testament to the power of refusing to be anyone's victim. The inheritance she would leave behind wouldn't just be financial. It would be the knowledge that love corrupted by greed becomes indistinguishable from hate, that families can be the most dangerous predators of all, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is the refusal to enable the people who are destroying you. Outside her window, Millbrook Heights settled into evening quiet, a prosperous suburb where other families were probably struggling with their own versions of loyalty and betrayal, love and money, aging and mortality. But in her reclaimed house, Eloisa Wright had found something more valuable than the millions her children had tried to steal. She had found herself again, and she was very much alive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,